we'll get started. It's right around 7 o'clock. I'm David Gardenstein, Chair of the Select Board. I want to welcome everybody who's come out this evening for our informational meeting. I'm probably going to sit down in a minute to speak to a series of articles, but I thought I would stand up, at least to start the meeting. And I want to begin, before I go through any of these articles, by introducing and welcoming our new town manager, Peter Elwell. Peter's been on board. Peter's been on board since January 20th, and it's been a pleasure working with him. I also want to thank Patrick Moreland for what turned into, if I'm counting correctly, a year and a half of work as interim town manager. And maybe we'll do this again on Saturday. So in years past, what I've tried to do, and like I say, I have a bunch of notes, so I'm going to sit down in a minute. What we've begun with is going through the budget and an explanation of an overview of the budget and changes from year to year and particular items that we think are particularly notable. And that's how we're going to start this year. We'll then go back to a series of other articles on which there may be questions that people may have. And it's really not the night to debate per se, but really to try to get as much information as possible so we can have an informed discussion this coming Saturday. And so I'm just going to begin by pointing out that the agenda for this meeting this coming Saturday is on page 7 through 9 of the town report. The red town report. And if you didn't bring yours along, it looks like there's boxes and boxes in the back. The article relating to the budget, which is the single biggest item that we deal with on an annual basis, is Article 23, to see how much money the town will raise, appropriate, and expend to defray its expenses and liabilities. Can everybody hear me? Is there any problem? We're okay? Good. If anybody can't hear me, let me know. And then if you turn ahead to page 61 in the red report, the town report, that's the budget summary. And then the line items for the town's budget run through page 75. And if you got specific questions, if you ask by reference to these pages in the town report, 61 to 75, it probably will help everybody to know what it is that you're referring to when you ask your question. So the budget as presented, as approved by the Select Board at the end of January, in anticipation of sending this town report to the printer, called for expenses, you see on page 61 under budget FY 2016, of $15,721,497. And that was a small increase from FY 15 to 16, although for reasons that I'll explain in a minute, it contemplated about a 2-cent tax increase, 2 cents per 100. Now, I'm going to explain how we got from the 2015 to the 2016 budget in a minute, some of the differences, some of the changes in approach. But I want to, before going there, explain that at our last Select Board meeting, we actually decided to adjust the budget that's going to be presented to town meeting this coming Saturday. And there is a handout, I hope that all of you have had a chance to receive, from the town manager explaining the changes between what's printed in the town report and the actual motion that we're going to make, that I'll probably make, at town meeting on Saturday. The budget at this point that we're going to be proposing is $15,532,899. And there are some changes in the budget as approved originally that I'll speak to in a minute. But after that $15,532,899, we're also proposing to use $96,000 and change from the unassigned fund balance so that the ultimate result of an approval of the budget and other articles as presented would be no tax increase from FY15 to FY16. And I'll explain how we got there in a minute. But the actual budget as presented, or as will be presented this coming Saturday, will be lower than what's in the town report. And I'll explain that and how we got there in a minute. And we're going to be proposing using a little over $96,000 from the unassigned fund balance to come in with essentially a 0% tax increase this year. What I try to do each year is to talk a little bit about what our expenses are and what our money is going towards. So we've got about a $15.5 million budget. If you were to go through the line items and segregate out just the items relating to salary and some other specific benefits like incentive pay, vacation buyback, overtime, and the like, that comes to a total of $6,498,708. When you then add in other wage and benefit-related items, workers' comp, occupational health and deductibles, salary increases, some vacation pay, Social Security payments, retirement benefits are lumped together in one line item in our budget. Health insurance is a single line item, $1,665,000 for all employees. Life insurance and other wage-related items. The total amount that goes to pay employees and for benefits is $10,077,775 approximately. So that's 65% of our budget of $15.5 million is to pay wages and benefits. There's then a series of other items, big ticket items, that bring us up to almost 80% of the total budget. They include our liability insurance of $330,000. We pay $140K annually to fund human service organizations. Costs $160,000 to provide the streetlights. We pay $200,000 for rescue, $50,000 for the bus, and then we have various obligations that we fund through notes and bonds. That's $1,385,405. When you add those in, along with the capital transfer to pay for our capital expenses where we're paying cash, and the solid waste, which is now a new budget and a separately formulated budget, that comes to $13,265,45. So that's more than 80%, which is the wages and benefits for the employees and those single big ticket items. And then the rest of the money, about $2 million, is to pay for the tar and for the salt and for the phones and for the fuel oil and everything else it takes to run the operations of the town. So that's how you get to the $15.5 million that we're planning to raise through taxes to fund the town's operations. And once again, what are the departments? Town manager's office, finance department, town clerk and the listers, planning, library, fire, small item for the municipal center, police and dispatch, public works, and parks and recs. So that's what your $15.5 million is buying. the funding of those agencies. The water and sewer is funded separately, and we do a separate enterprise fund budget for that over the course of the next 2 months. The parking budget is run separately. Solid waste is also going to be run separately going forward. So that's like an overview of what is being bought with that $15.5 million. Now, the original budget, as presented, called for a 2-cent tax increase, but actually the numbers from one year to the next looked very similar. And comparing the budget from one year to the next is somewhat difficult because of different assumptions and different ways the budget has been built over the course of the last years. And so I want to explain some of the differences that speak to the difference in the way that the budgets are constructed. First, last year, the tax rate was kept down through 2 significant transfers of money from the capital fund. So we had money built up in the unassigned fund balance, capital fund, from the unassigned fund balance. And so we spent at least $510,000 from our savings account to lower taxes in the FY15 budget. One of those pockets of money was $310,000 that the year before we had agreed to put into rebuilding the skating rink. We didn't have to spend that money, so we just applied that to lower taxes last year. Also, we took another $200,000 to keep the tax rate down last year. There are some other changes in the budget that impact the bottom line and that sort of make it difficult to look at them exactly apples to apples. For example, this coming year, we're going to be renegotiating collective bargaining agreements. So I believe all 3 collective bargaining agreements have to be negotiated this year. There is a line item in the budget that says potential salary increases. That raises the money through taxes for the likelihood that we're going to have to ultimately agree, not have to, that we're ultimately going to agree on behalf of the town, probably some wage increases. Also, the other way significant change in budgeting from last year to this year is the transition to pay as you throw, which is scheduled to begin on or about July 1, unless we can start it earlier. So, the Vermont legislature determined about 2 years ago that we needed to adopt a variable rate pricing method for disposal of solid waste. We here in Brattleboro are ahead of the curve, both because of the way significant recycling efforts that we made about 2 years ago, and because of our adoption of curbside composting pickup. I'm not aware of another municipality within the state of Vermont that does curbside composting pickup, and anybody who does both recycling and curbside composting will tell you that when it comes time to throw your garbage away at the end of the week, there's almost nothing there, because all you have to throw away is tin foil and plastic wrap. And I just got an email saying that we're going to be able to throw away tin foil and aluminum trays also in the recycling, not throw away, put it in the recycling as of July 1. So, we're going to pay as you throw starting July 1 or thereabouts. What that means is that for all residents in the town to throw away their trash, they're going to have to buy town-distributed and town-endorsed garbage bags. We've priced them out, $2 for a medium-sized bag, $3 for a large bag. They'll be available at all sorts of retail outlets. And so there is an influx of money in the budget here of $380,000, Patrick? $380,000 approximately from the purchase of the bags by everybody who's going to have to buy garbage bags to throw their garbage away. And that's a transition that we're making. Everybody is way encouraged to focus on recycling and composting because it will keep the cost of the garbage you have to throw away and send to the dump way down. But you see an influx of about $380,000 in the budget, although the way it's reflected is that now all the costs for solid waste disposal, including the tipping fees and the trucking fees and all other associated fees, are going to be in a separate budget. And you're now going to see about a $550,000 transfer out of our operating budget and into the solid waste management budget. So that's a change in approach as well. There are some other changes from one year, from FY15 to 16, that are reflected in the budget, but those are the primary ones. Originally, the increase in the budget was comprised of a number of factors. During the preparation of the budget, we had made a series of we had been presented initially with a series of proposed cuts. And the select board decided that there were a series of capital items that really needed to be in the budget in order to make sure that we can provide basic essential services. So, there's actually a separate article this year for some of these capital items. We are buying this year 2 cruisers. We had talked about just buying 1, but we decided to buy 2 to keep us on the rotation, 2 a year. We're buying a dump truck, and we're buying the grader. We've been talking about potentially buying the grader every year since I've been on the board, 4 years now, and before I joined the board. This year we need to buy the grader. So we got a dump truck, a grader. The fire department put in for grants last year to buy air packs because we need to have the same design and upgraded air packs for our firefighters who are going into buildings where there's fire and smoke. We did not get the grant money, and so we're expending $140,000, some cash, some through note, to purchase air packs for the fire department. We decided that we're going to begin a process of replacing the windows at the Gibson-Aiken Center, because essentially we're throwing, fuel out the window in the wintertime. So we've got $30,000 in the budget to begin replacing windows at the Gibson-Aiken Center. Those are all items, capital items, that are in this year's budget. We're also buying 1 vehicle for the assistant chief because his vehicle that he responds in is no longer even roadworthy particularly. So there are other capital items that we're still facing. There was a strong request to replace one of the fire trucks. I can promise you it's going to be on the budget requests next year. There are other items that we're going to be confronting over the course of the year. But for right now, these are the capital items that are in the budget. We had included also in the budget, as printed in the town report, $140,000 to pay interest on additional borrowing for the police fire facilities. That was a divided vote of the board. Ultimately, bond counsel told us that unless we were going forward with the project as approved in October 2012, which meant both fire stations and the police station at the municipal center, all moving forward in general as proposed originally, that unless we were proceeding with that project, we couldn't spend the bonded money that we had already taken out, and we couldn't take out more bonded money under the authority given out in October 2012. So, although we included $140,200 in the draft of the budget that's in the red report, and it was in the debt and notes lines, to proceed with the police fire work that came out of the budget at the meeting 2 weeks ago tomorrow. Also, we got very good news, thanks to the hard work of our finance director and the school finance director. We bid out fuel oil when the price was, I don't know, $2.50, $2.60. Don't we all wish we were getting fuel oil for $2.60? And so we saved almost $100,000. Was that $1.99? We got fuel oil for next year at $1.99. All right. So $60,000 of that is coming out of the general fund, and the other 40 is in the enterprise funds, particularly the utilities fund. So with 140 coming out from the police fire and the 60 coming out from the fuel oil savings, we were very close to being able to provide a level tax rate with no increase from FY15 to 16. I'll ask the town manager to speak in just a second about this, but the town manager's got a very, very firm position about use of fund balance, unassigned fund balance, to help defray taxes. And the board has decided to go along with that position. We understand it, and we agree that it's probably the right approach in order to make sure that we can compare budgets from year to year. So this year, for 1 year, we're taking $96,000 out of that unassigned fund balance in order to keep the tax rate at a 0% increase. And that's essentially how we get to this year's budget at $15,530,000, with $96,000 off from the unassigned fund balance. That brings us to essentially no tax increase from FY15 to FY16 on the town side. If you come to the school meeting later this week, you're going to see their budget actually drops a little bit as well, but the state's going to increase the school tax rate, but that's a separate issue. But our budget is going to be level. And essentially our goal was to provide level service. So we didn't cut services. We didn't cut personnel. Essentially, with a new town manager coming in, we essentially level serviced everything in the budget. And what I'm going to then do is I'm going to ask the new town manager to speak both about his approach to spending unassigned fund balance, number one, and then number two, to speak to the efforts he's going to be making with department heads and with all employees of the town to review all of the services that the town provides, because that's been a goal of the select board for many years, and it's a process that's now underway. So I'll hand it over to Peter, and then we'll take whatever questions you may have about anything relating to the budget.
Thank you, David, and good evening. I will speak first to the unassigned fund balance. You've heard that $96,000 of the unassigned fund balance is to be used as a balancing item for this year, and that is down from $200,000 plus the transfer back from capital a year ago. So where a year ago there was about $500,000 worth of savings account funds that were being used as opposed to real-time revenues, this year there's $96,000. What I've discussed with the board and want to recommend to town meeting is that going forward, to the maximum extent possible, that we avoid using fund balance, unassigned fund balance, as a balancing tool in future budgets, because just as in a household income, a household budget, if you have a certain amount of money coming in and a certain amount of money going out, and more is going out than coming in, and you're drawing down your savings, that can only go on for so long. And so we don't want to operate the town's budget that way either, just as you wouldn't operate your household that way. So what the savings account is for, and it's very important to us at a time like right now when we face several different capital needs, significant capital infrastructure needs in the community that are unfunded because they became sort of emergency situations before we had a chance to actually have money in the budget to address them. So we've got the Elliott Street Bridge, and we've got the Green Street retaining wall, and life safety issues, the fire system and others in the municipal center that need to be addressed that are not budgeted anywhere. My recommendation to the board and my recommendation to town meeting is that we reserve the use of unassigned fund balance to those purposes. Those are important public purposes, so it is still applying the taxpayers' money that has accumulated from prior year surpluses to needs of the community, but in a way where you're spending savings account funds on a one-time need so that the recurring costs of operating town government from one year to another are paid for with the real-time revenues, the property taxes and the other funds that we collect through fees and other sources year after year. Otherwise, there's two different things that can happen that are, I think, both bad for the long-term financial health of the town. One is that we're living beyond our means, and so as years go by, we're providing a level of service and a level of cost of town government that is beyond our ability to actually raise revenues in real time. That will catch up to us, and when it catches up to us, the second thing happens, which is a very painful process of either significantly reducing the services to the community or significantly increasing taxes in any given year. We can keep the funding of town budgets relatively more stable from one year to another when we adhere to a policy that unassigned fund balance will be used only for one-time expenditures. The planning process that is underway has three major pieces to it, and the first is to, and let me say the overarching purpose of what the staff and I have undertaken is to make sure that a year from now, the budgetary decisions, actually by next fall, when we're working together with the select board on the proposed budget for the following year, and then a year from now for you as town meeting representatives, that we'll all be in a position where we can make the decisions for that year's budget, for the FY17 budget, in a context that relates more fully to the variety of services that are provided to the community, the relationship between the budget and those services that are delivered, and importantly to the longer term perspective of how decisions related to FY17 will affect the longer term financial health of the town. So there's three pieces to that. The first piece is underway, which is to take the town's line item budget and allocate the costs in the different departments to the various programs and activities of town government. So some of that is administrative support services, but to a great degree, the greatest degree, it is the service that's provided by the various departments to the community. By thinking more programmatically, and I should say that for those of you familiar with program budgets, what we're not trying to do in this effort is to create a true program budget. We may or may not do that down the road. It's not possible to do that and do it well in the space of just a couple of months. But by at least beginning to think in programmatic terms and allocating the budgets not by very precise calculations, but by reasonable approximations of what these different aspects of each functional area of each department cost the town on the line item budget. Thinking programmatically will help us do the second and the third piece of this work well. So the second piece, which we expect to undertake in April and have completed by midsummer, is our comprehensive review of all the town operations, whether they be support services or community services. And there, what we're looking to do is, using this programmatic thinking and our knowledge of where the details are in the line item budget, look at every aspect of how we work together as a staff, how we serve the community, how different aspects of town government interact with other providers of services in the community as well, and find as many ways as we can to potentially find efficiencies, but definitely to make sure that we're providing the services in the most intelligent manner, ways that either will raise our ability to provide good quality services without increasing cost to the town, or save money while maintaining levels of service. The intent here is not strictly to save money on the budget, but I believe we will find some ways to do that. The intent is to make sure that we've got the different programmatic areas calibrated properly. I think what we're going to find as we go deeper into this process over the next several months is that there are areas where we are investing more resources than necessary in one programmatic area, but less resources than necessary in another. So the end result is not necessarily to come back and propose a less costly town government, but hopefully one that is in ways that we can document and describe and discuss more effectively serving the community for the tax dollar that you pay. We then will take the result of that effort, and in the latter part of the summer, moving into the fall, as we begin to think towards the FY17 budget preparation, create a long-term financial plan. So by having begun to think programmatically and then taking that to a very intense turning over every stone and looking really carefully at every program in the comprehensive review, we'll then be able to forecast from a baseline of where we are in the budget that you're about to consider and approve in the next few days, to the one that we'll be beginning to prepare for the following year, and at least 5 years out into the future beyond that. So that a year from now, when we're having these conversations, the budgetary decisions that the board will be recommending to you and you'll be discussing and deciding will be able to be in the context of not just what will be meeting the needs of the town of Brattleboro in fiscal year 17, but beyond that, if certain choices are made in fiscal year 17, there'll be implications that can be calculated out into the early 2020s. This is a very aggressive schedule to undertake these three things at once, but I think it's important. And in the process, when I was interviewing with the board for this position, and then our discussions in preparation for my arrival and the work that we've been doing together over the last couple of months, we need to move quickly on this. We need to get to where a year from now we're making budgetary decisions for the particular fiscal year in the broader context of long-term financial health for the community. So we're really hurrying, especially on this first part, on the programmatic piece, and we will come back to that later. We will spend some more time well into the future, drilling down to a finer level of detail on that. But it was important for us to do the first piece of that using good educated estimates, so we can move quickly into the really intense process of completing the comprehensive review and creating a long-term financial plan. At each threshold along the way, as we go through these three phases, we'll be making presentations to the board. So there'll be good public discussion of this. We welcome continued involvement and input from the community. I know a lot of you, if you can't come out on the particular Tuesday night, will be watching on BCTV. We want that. We want that engagement as we go through this process. And then again, the end product of that hopefully will be useful for staff, for the select board, and for all of you when we get to working through next year's budget.
Thanks, Peter. And so we're looking forward very much to this comprehensive review of town operations in order to be able to make more informed decisions. And we look forward to doing that work with Peter and with all the rest of the department heads and our employees. For right now, what we've talked about covers Article 23, which is the budget item, and Article 21, which is the capital acquisitions that are going to be bonded for. I'll also note that Article 19 previously called for $375,000 from the unassigned fund balance to pay for capital projects, the Green Street retaining wall, the Elliott Street Bridge, the Municipal Center life safety improvements, and the Union Street Western Avenue intersection improvements. So we've already approved moving forward with the Union Street Western Avenue intersection project, and I think that'll happen just as soon as it's warm enough to be able to be working on the tar and the concrete. And we are aggressively moving ahead with the Green Street retaining wall, because that wall is falling down, and we can't really predict how long it's going to remain stable. It's probably not stable now. The LEH strip bridge has got a hole in it, and you can only go one lane at a time on the south side of town. And there's about $450,000 worth of life safety improvements at the municipal center that have to be made. I mean, the life safety department has come in and said that this work has to be done, and we're working with them to get there. The only other thing that I would say before opening it up to any kind of questions is that the tax rate also is impacted by the grand list. And this year, it's my understanding that there's a minor increase in the grand list. My understanding is that we have $151 million worth of taxable real property in the town of Brattleboro. Some of it residential, some of it commercial, some of it in current use, but $1,151,000. And the grand lease list is increasing $4 million to $1,155,000. And, it's going to save you $4 on your $100,000 house. So that's the impact of the change in the grand list this year. Does anybody have any questions about anything relating to the budget? All right, yeah, I guess Peter wants me to explain, and that's a good thing. The Article 19 relating to the $375,000 for capital expenditures, we realized about 3 weeks ago that $200,000 that had been committed to pay for, John, remind me, the $200,000 was committed to pay for reduced taxes this current year, actually was in the reserved fund balance, committed fund balance. It's called the committed fund balance rather than the unassigned fund balance. And when we had been doing our calculations about how much money was available in the savings account to keep us at a 10% savings account, we had been acting under the understanding that the $200K to offset FY15 taxes was coming from the unassigned fund balance. But it had actually been set aside by John, and the auditors had approved that approach in the committed fund. So we actually had $200,000 more in the unassigned fund balance than we realized when we were doing early drafts of this budget. So we took 110 of that and added it to the amount of money we're asking for authorization to do capital projects with, and the other 96 to reduce taxes this year is the rest of that $200,000. Thanks for reminding me, Peter. So I saw a hand. Mr. Agave. Please use the microphone.
Actually, you just answered the question with your last remark. I was going to ask what Peter had neglected, I think, was to mention that we intend to maintain a 10% reserve, because you had said that we wanted to keep our savings, but then we also wanted to use it for capital projects, without actually mentioning that we would just be using the surplus for the capital projects. So actually, I'm just wasting everybody's time right now. But I just wanted everybody to know that we are maintaining that 10% reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Garvey. I think that's a really important point. You're right. I did neglect to say it. So the comments that I made about using the savings account for capital purposes is to distinguish that from using it for operating funds. But I certainly wouldn't suggest that we use it all up. The board knows better, and the town has been committed to a policy of maintaining a minimum of 10% of the operating costs, annual operating costs, as a unassigned fund balance available for, very significant emergency situations. And so So that is intact, and the amounts that we're talking about this evening to be used from the unassigned fund balance are the excess unassigned above 10%.
Mr. Schiff.
Leo Schiff, District 3. I wanted to ask about Article 22, the 1% local option tax. And now that I've come to understand that we're not going to be voting on anything related to funding police fire projects this year, can you enlighten me kind of as to why would we be voting on this, other than that it was warned?
Because it was warned. I'm hoping not to have a lot of debate this evening because we've debated it year in and year out. There'll be debate at town meeting because it's on the warning. We're not allowed to pass articles. So we're going to have discussion to the extent everybody feels it necessary. People will be able to speak at the time to potentially why it is that they wanted it included in the first place. But no, there's no particular police fire issues in this warning and on this town meeting agenda, except to the extent that our annual payment on the original $5 million bond is included in the bonds and notes section. Thank you, Leo. I don't remember your name. Ms. Melton.
Paula Melton, District 1. So I just had a couple questions about pay-as-you-throw. I'm wondering if you have determined that curbside compost is fully scalable for the whole town. And also I'm wondering if there are any relief options for low-income families who might be using disposable diapers at either end of the life cycle.
I'll speak to the latter, and then I'll ask Patrick to speak to the former if you can. As to the issues relating to assistance for low-income residents of the town, the board had significant discussions about whether we should include some sort of financial assistance or relief, and decided not to make that available. There were a series of reasons, I think, for that. It included that the statewide policy is to move to this variable rate pricing system in order to ensure that everybody is working to separate trash from recyclables and from compost. And it appeared that to create a disincentive by providing financial support for anybody who's using the solid waste system was contrary to that objective. It's also, it seems to us, at least this is what we talked about at the meeting, a statewide mandate. And if there's going to be relief for low-income residents, then there should be a statewide solution rather than imposing it on the town itself. So we did not make any accommodation for assistance. If social service agencies are available to make bags available, for example, then we certainly encourage that, but we're not building that into the system. We also heard from people who have surveyed other systems that even in places where they provide some measure of assistance, it really doesn't get used hardly at all. And then Patrick will speak to the composting.
Sure, thank you, David. The question was about the curbside compost program. I think one of the things to come out of the very excellent work that the Pay-As-You-Throw Working Group has done is to recognize that participation in the compost program is going to be one of the key ways in which citizens have the ability to take some measure of control over their solid waste expenses. So as a result of that, we're planning on a significant increase in participation in curbside composting. And recently, the board has set aside some funds, for example, for the purchase of new curbside compost carts. And in the coming weeks, I think you're going to begin to see some public education starting to happen with respect to the Pay As You Throw program. There's going to be some public events where we're promoting the curbside compost program in recognition of the fact that that's really going to expand, we anticipate, in terms of participation. And we prepared for that. We'll be getting some more information out to the public about that really in just the next couple of weeks. Does that answer the question, Paul?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Ms. Davison?
Judy Davidson, District 3. I just have a question about why we're replacing a 2011 Cruiser. Just curious in terms of that date of a car. It just seems like it's a fairly recent Cruiser to be replacing.
The police chief can explain the cruiser rotation.
Okay.
Please, thank you.
Mike Fitzgerald, Brattleboro Police Chief. Our rotation on our cruisers go anywhere from a 4 to 5 year cycle, and those vehicles are ran 24/7. We have 3 shifts, so out of a 24-hour period, that vehicle is probably going to be sitting maybe 8 hours. So they're constantly going on 16 hours a day, which a 4-year vehicle may seem a lot, but in that 4-year period, we'll very easily get anywhere from 80 to 100,000 miles on that vehicle. And for officer safety purposes, once they reach around the 80, 85,000 mile mark, then we try to replace it as soon as possible. Did I answer your question? Yes, thank you. You're welcome.
Ms. Barber?
Ryan Barber, District 1. As is usually the case with me when confronted with a blizzard of figures, I get lost. And sometimes I miss things because of my hearing aids, probably. I still have not heard a clear explanation on the handout from Mr. Elwell of what adds up to $1,962,959 of revenues other than property taxes, which I assume is new money. So could somebody please straighten me out?
That is all the revenue in the budget summary, for example, on page 61. That doesn't come from property taxes. So It's everything else. It's the rooms and meals and alcohol tax. It's not the 1% local option sales tax. Licenses, outside revenue from police, everything else.
Okay. Be kind of nice if it was summarized in the budget the same way.
We'll try that next year. Mr. Davis?
Thank you. I'm Andrew Davis from District 3. I'm just wanting to clarify how the solid waste budget is getting reconfigured. And I notice on page 67 at the bottom, we're taking off the complete amounts out of the budget of approximately $1 million, which is almost 1/15 of the whole town budget. At that one little point at the bottom of page 67. $500,000 for refuse collection. We're taking off the tipping fees and the solid waste management district assessment. That's a lot of money. And I've heard that we're looking to raise about $350,000 in selling plastic bags, which is income, but we're taking $1 million off. We're finding under $400,000 of income. So that's one question. If you could sort of summarize, if we're taking this off of the budget, how are we paying that in this new budget? If that could be explained concisely, clearly, so that I can understand it. That's a pretty...
Look on page 71.
Okay.
$555,500 is being transferred to the solid waste fund. Very bottom.
Yep.
So that's money that's coming from the operating fund and going into what's going to be a new, essentially, enterprise fund for solid waste disposal. That's going to pay for everything that's not variable rate pricing. So it's going to pay for compost and recycling.
And is that a one-time transfer or
An annual.
Annual transfer?
Annual. And then we're going to be raising, we approximate conservatively, $380,000, $385,000 from the sale of bags.
Okay.
That comes to $935,000 or $940,000 for solid waste. We also anticipate saving money on garbage disposal.
Good.
Because we're going to be doing more recycling and more composting because people don't want to pay for as many garbage bags, so that
Gotcha.
We're not tipping as much.
Good. So that explains that. The other question I had that I've heard around town and on discussions on various new media, people have the feeling that we're spending out of pocket that $350,000 for bags, which is like an assessment. It's not a tax. It's definitely related to our use, and I get the whole point, and I'm a big fan of pay-as-you-throw. But some people have been saying, well, why isn't that reflected in a reduction of taxation? If you could just do a clear explanation. I'm going to sit down and hear it's $385,000 out of people's pockets, and I don't have a clear answer for someone that asked me that question.
Well, the very first budget discussion that we had, and during the first budget discussion we had, and repeatedly since that time, I have said publicly and out loud that the 0% tax increase also has to take account of the fact that people are going to have to pay out of pocket for their garbage bags going forward. So you're not paying any more in municipal taxes in FY16 than FY15 if this budget is adopted in this form. But you're going to be paying out of pocket for disposing of your garbage. And so there's going to be a real increase in the cost to run your household. And that's you have control of it to a certain extent. I mean, if you do a small bag a week, that's $100 a year. But that is a real increase that people are going to be carrying going forward. And I won't disagree with that. We could have tried to cut the budget $380,000, $385,000 more, and then we would have been right back where we were after the budget was rejected at a referendum last year, talking about getting rid of sidewalk snow plowing and librarians and police officers and firefighters. And we had that terribly bruising battle last spring, and if we got to do it again, we will. But there wasn't really the stomach for cutting core municipal services, from what I heard from everybody around town. So there is an effective tax increase in that $385 to buy garbage bags. John? Yeah, you're totally right, Andy. Well, Mr. Wilmerding first.
No, thank you. John Wilmerding, 2nd District. I'll just segue quickly on the pay-as-you-throw recycling issue. I'm happy to report, since I sub in the schools on call at different times, that there's progress in the schools on recycling, but it's still not complete. My question has to do with institutions and businesses in the town. Will they be subject to the same requirements as we in our homes in terms of pay-as-you-throw? And what will be done to encourage or mandate source separation?
You guys, Patrick, to speak to that item briefly.
Sure. To be perfectly honest, John, I'm a little less familiar with the requirements that are coming in for businesses because they're being phased in differently by the state on a different timeline. So, for example, I'm aware that large-scale excess food producers are now operating under certain requirements that will begin to apply year in, year out to smaller and smaller institutions. For example, today I believe it's in the coming year it's going to start to apply to schools, supermarkets, that sort of thing. But it's going to be phasing in over the next several years for participation from commercial customers. The impacts that are going to be happening this next year are really most notably related to residential customers and most specifically for folks who are participating in the curbside program here in Brattleboro.
So we provide trash pickup for residential units, 4 units and under. And there are, I believe, requirements for other residential dwelling units with more than 4 units, but that's not administered by the town. That's going to be state regulation of haulers and through the Solid Waste Management District. Mr. Mima?
Yeah, thanks very much. Ralph Mima, District 3. I have a question about the budget in general in terms of whether any provision has been made for dealing with what might at least temporarily be an increase in garbage on the streets that people leave because they choose not to pay for bags. And the reason I bring this up is that I'm a small landlord, and times are tough for tenants and for small landlords in Brattleboro on the whole. And I've had tenants say to me that they are simply not able to absorb another $20 to $30 to $40 a month in costs to buy bags. And they've said to me, you're going to have to provide them. And I've said, well, do you want me to raise the rent? And they've said, of course not. And I've said, this is economically rational. We'll all get used to it. And they've just said, forget it. I'm not going to buy the bags. I'm just going to drive around at night, and when no one's looking, throw the bags off in a ditch. And, some of that might be facetious. I noticed that there is an increase of $6,000 for grounds maintenance. But I wondered if there's anything else in the budget to temporarily deal with maybe more work required to pick up trash that otherwise would have been put out in the garbage cans.
What I'll say is that the budget for solid waste is not presented here because it's a separate enterprise fund budget for the coming year. Part of the contract services that we've arranged for going forward for the transition to pay-as-you-throw include working with the vendor that's going to be distributing the bags and with Mr. Kaler to deal with enforcement-related issues. And there certainly has been significant discussion at the select board level about that risk of trash not being put in approved bags, but it's very, very difficult to quantify that at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, ma'am, I don't know your name.
Hi there, I'm Emily Megas Russell. I'm a new town rep in District 1. I have a couple of questions. Because I'm new to all this. But my first question is, it looks like there's a few articles that speak to using money from the unassigned fund balance as well as the $96,000. All that together is less than using all of that would still reserve the 10%. I just want to clarify that.
Yes. The sum total of this, because of the individual pieces and because of how the conversation unfolded, the sum total of what's in the warrant articles would leave us with just under 10%, like 9.9. But I've been over that with Mr. O'Connor, the finance director, to make sure that we covered exactly that concern. And because we expect to end the current operating year with a slight surplus, on June 30th, we'll be at the 10%.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. My second question is Article 19. The amount to come out of the unassigned budget looks like it's $375,000, but I imagine these projects will cost more than that. I'm just curious if you could clarify where you plan to use that money within those projects, or if that's to be determined. I can ask again.
Where are we spending the four? It's actually 485 rather than 375. I don't anticipate the 485.
Sure. Right. As David mentioned in the presentation, we itemized those 4 projects at the time that the warning was being finalized because they are the 4 significant capital infrastructure needs that were relative surprises over this past year or so and require substantial funds. We knew that the 375 initially and now the 485 would not be sufficient to fund all of them. It's insufficient actually in several cases to fund even just one of them completely. But it was a proper use of unassigned fund balance, and it left open the possibility, if you do approve it, the allocation of these funds for these purposes, it leaves open the possibility to allocate it to the proper project when we have more information about how those are coming together. So, for instance, at this point, as you mentioned, the Union Hill Western Avenue intersection is already going to be addressed because working together, the Public Works Department looking at what they could do versus what it would cost to go out and contract for that work, determined that we could do that with town labor and save a lot of money, and so that project is going to happen and it won't touch any of this money. Likewise, on the Green Street retaining wall, there'll be discussion at tomorrow night's select board meeting about some grant funds that we've become aware of that we're pretty confident we're going to be able to receive that'll pay for the lion's share of that. So there'll be some of this 485 that'll probably need to be applied to that project, but a relatively small amount. The balance would then be available for either applying to the costs of the municipal center or to Elliott Street.
Okay, thank you.
And we're actually applying, we're approving an application tomorrow night at the select board meeting. We're considering an application tomorrow night at the select board meeting to put in for grant funds for the scoping work for the Elliott Street Bridge as well. So we're always looking for grant funds.
And I have one more question. Thanks for humoring me. Article 20 about the skate park, and this might be a better question for the town meeting, so I'm happy to be redirected. But I'm just curious if that got voted down, if that effectively freezes the projects or stops the project.
It will not freeze the project. And I don't really think it'll even hurt the project. I don't think it'll hurt the project either, but I'm in favor. The skate park has got, I don't know how long you've been in town, but a way, way long history, and it's gotten shuttled from site to site to site, and we thought it was appropriate to ask town meeting members if they wanted to put in $20,000 from the assigned fund balance to help do some scoping work for that skate park, and, just $20,000 from the 10%. Just won't really damage that fund. So.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Sir, I don't know your name. Here. Take the mic, please.
Christian Stromberg, District 1. I'm also new. Yay. Oh. Only 1 year. So on page 62, on one of the revenue items, in lieu of taxes, as I understand it, the portion of property in town that does not pay taxes is about 15% that is exempt, maybe 20% is exempt. Something about that. And, I'd personally like to see, we're not going to go over the police and fire, but that roughly $600,000 a year. Anyway, that we increase that amount somehow. Either there's certain things that are less exempt, or everything is. Ultimately, things like police and fire is a burden shared by everyone, and ultimately, everyone has an obligation to it. People who can't afford their taxes on their house right now, they're not just forgiven, sorry. But yet, somebody could have their house repossessed, and say a hospital, doesn't have to pay taxes. They may pay a little, as we can see, but it's not really much compared to what the actual property taxes would be. And that, is a huge chunk that could pay for the police and fire station. That's it.
Payments in lieu of taxes are a difficult topic to tackle. There are some limited tax exemptions that town meeting approves, but the vast majority of tax exemptions are state mandated, and we have little or no ability to leverage payments in lieu of taxes out of the tax exempt institutions in the town, which include the schools, the hospitals, and government buildings as well. Like you may have heard that the state's thinking of cutting back on the payment in lieu of taxes program. We, as the regional economic hub, host many of the service agencies for the entire county, and we, as a town and as a municipality, suffer the tax burden associated with those entities not paying taxes, and we don't have a reasonable way to raise revenue from the traffic that comes into town using those facilities other than the local options taxes. And the local option sales tax is probably a bad idea because of competition with New Hampshire. And so we are lacking an adequate way to raise money off of those service providers. And we keep looking at the issue, but have not determined an effective way to address it. But we will continue to look at it. We're certainly aware of it.
We are trying, I'm not sure that it's begun, but we're going to be trying to begin a process of tracking the actual cost of services of various of the nonprofits and state entities, so we can have some real numbers to show in terms of what it costs, what you're paying for that other people are taking advantage of. Yeah, it's statute, and there's really nothing we can do about it.
The state legislature is looking into it.
I don't want to have a lengthy discussion of payment in lieu of taxes. I mean, we're aware of it, but I don't know really what the remedy is at this point. Other questions about the budget or the unassigned fund balance, Mr. Agavi?
I certainly have to agree that the board has done due diligence, I guess is the word, in bringing forth a level funded budget and no taxes. And feels good. It also makes me a little nervous. For one reason is that it's a rather exceptional that our fuel costs went down $1 a gallon. I don't know if anybody in this room, what anybody in this room would stake or bet that it won't be $1 more next year. It might have been wise actually to pad the fuel bill a little bit and hope for a surplus so that next year you'd have that. But that's really minor. Next year there may be a police and fire project or some major infrastructure project that would include that or parts of that. And that would be adding another $150,000 to start with and then more as the principal came in. On top of that, I noticed that next year we have $5 million, $5.1 million in our capital plan. Now, I understand, I may be wrong, that expecting to spend $5 million, we're spending $1 million this year. So to go to $5 million is extraordinary. So the chances are that we are going to be able, and this is one thing you may respond to, actually be spending that much on capital improvements next year seems very slim. That means a lot of things get pushed forward again into succeeding years, which have not got small capital amounts in them right now, $2 and $3 million a year. So whatever you push forward, now those things go to $3 and $4 million a year. My point overall is that although we are pleased to not be raising taxes, inflation continues, and many threats are out there. The fuel oil is one, the infrastructure projects and other capital needs. I feel like we're standing with our heels on the edge of a ledge. I don't feel secure about what's going to happen next year. I have this dread that next year you will be up there saying, informing us about all these unfortunate things that have happened and that now we have to pay for them. So I don't have any particular recommendations except that we should try and save every penny we can right now, and then hopefully as perhaps the program stuff that Peter's talking about and all these other things will enable us to become sufficiently more efficient and effective that we'll be able to manage the future. But I'm nervous about it.
The only response I'll make is that we were encouraged not to reduce the budget by the savings in the fuel, but having accurate figures that we were going to be spending $100,000 less in fuel this year than last year, or than we had budgeted for. It seemed prudent to pass that on in savings to the taxpayer. Spoon's absolutely right. The cost for fuel is probably going to be back up $100,000 next year, and it'll be reflected in the budget we present next year. Ms. Melton?
Yes, I just wanted a clarification because I think I heard you say before there was something about we're not able to spend the police fire bond money if it doesn't match the project that was approved. I was just wondering if you could, maybe this isn't the right forum, but if you could speak to that, that'd be good.
Just very briefly, bond counsel was asked and responded that the approval for 14 and change million in borrowing authority was tied to a three-part project at the sites of the current locations. I think that if we had made changes that brought down the cost but left the project materially the same, we could have spent the money that we've already borrowed and borrowed the rest of the money to continue working on the project. But most recently, there's been proposals from the Police Fire Facilities Committee to not expand at the municipal center and instead to purchase real estate and renovate that real estate on Putney Road to put the police station up there. And bond counsel has indicated that a significant change in the project like that is not what was within the contemplation of the original authority, and therefore that we can't spend the money for that purpose at this time. So the select board's going to be working over the coming months to look at the project as a whole in light of the town's long-term obligations. And in order to get new authority, unless we're moving forward generally as originally approved, we're going to have to come back to town meeting. Mr. Wilmerding.
Thank you. Friends and neighbors, it's been frustrating this past year to be the only person appointed to the town's finance committee. You may have seen my letters to the editor in the newspaper and announcements to the select board to the effect that we welcome additional comers to be members of the Finance Committee. Even if you are not a representative to town meeting, you are eligible to serve on a committee like that. And I've discussed this with Mr. Elwell and other persons present, and I would like to encourage you once again, as I know the moderator will do on Saturday, to step forward if you would like to meet occasionally, hopefully not too often, with other Finance Committee members and prepare recommendations for a representative town meeting, as is our mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilmerding. Yes, ma'am, I don't recognize you.
Sharon Couturier, District 3. I wonder if there are any resources in the budget addressing the issue, the problem we have in Brattleboro with homelessness, and more immediately the problem of the homeless finding overnight shelter, but then in the daytime they have no place to go. And so they're finding shelter in businesses and public buildings in town, and those places are bearing an unfair share of the burden, I think, of what is a community problem. Thank you.
We have a relatively aggressive human services funding budget. Article 18 includes $120,000, which is 1% of the budget, for a range of different social service agencies. I believe included in there are funds that go to the issues you're speaking to. It is fair to say that with Vermont Yankee going offline, social services agencies are looking everywhere for needed resources, and we certainly continue to face challenge to fund those services.
There also are indirect costs that aren't explicitly reflected in the town's operating budget, but where we will be devoting some resources to exactly that issue. There's a conversation that has begun among numerous agencies in the community and some private sector organizations about how we can collaborate more effectively. The police chief's involved in those conversations, I'm involved in those conversations, and we hope to make progress on that in the months ahead.
Mr. Phillips.
Steve Phillips, District 3. So I've got one comment and two questions. The comment is I'd just like to congratulate Fire Chief Bacassi and his staff for saving the life of an allegedly very misguided young person from out of town. Our police and fire people will come to your rescue. They will protect you, and we owe them a lot. So I'll leave that as the end of my comment. My first question is there a way to seek compensation from those allegedly misguided young people?
We have in the past looked, and there are other towns that have policies relating to billing for costs of services rendered in crashes. For example, when I was town attorney, Buddy, we adopted a policy to bill the carrier when there was a crash on the interstate and Putney Fire and Rescue was responding. We have a limited policy like that here, I believe.
Good.
But I don't believe it raises a lot of funds. Chief Bacassi, fair to say, or Assistant Chief Lynch, we do have a policy here.
We do have a policy in place, and it's a town ordinance. We don't have a lot of collecting on a lot of it. In this case, that you're talking about, it was a mutual aid call. As long as the mutual aid agreement was canceled.
Okay. Thank you. So that might be worth looking into in the future. I know that hikers who hike in foolish weather and have to be rescued sometimes get charged. It seems to be more of a New Hampshire thing. So the last question is back to police fire project. What is the current thinking of the board in terms of having a special town meeting to move some or all of these projects forward?
I think it's fair to say that there's no consensus on the board at this time, but it's a topic that's going to be discussed as soon as we can get to it.
Great.
Would that be fair for the rest of the board members?
I think what Dave said is accurate. But as you know, there is a majority that supports this project going forward. And the thing was, one of the many things holding the other members back was the lack of a really coherent plan that we could point to all the components and say, this is what it's going to be. We know what it's going to be. There aren't going to be any surprises. And our intention at this point, and I think that this, I can say this, is to work as quickly as we possibly can to get that in place, to get a plan for all three facilities in place, and a funding mechanism, and the whole package, and then to have a special town meeting. And this, as soon as possible. When Dave said months, John and I said no, weeks. So, I mean, that's where we're at. But it's a priority, and
Good.
You know, John and I have, and probably others have said to Peter that we want it to be really high in this list.
Great, thank you.
Dylan McKinnon, District 2. I'm also new. Had a lot of bad luck weather-wise the last several years with the hurricane, with the horrendous snow load we had. Was looking at the overtime for public works for winter snow removal and whatnot. Is there any plans going forward to potentially increase the the potential overtime, or have a little buffer in the fund for more bad years or anything like that?
Those are the kinds of things, that's one example of the kinds of things that we will be looking at in our comprehensive review. So in a situation where a number of years in a row we've overexpended, we need to determine whether that is reasonably still construed as just a bad run of years and the norm is still below that and we're budgeting appropriately, or whether the cost of that function of government is higher than what we've been budgeting. And so we'll be looking at literally hundreds of those kinds of questions as we go through the process of the comprehensive review. Overtime is a tricky one. It is, generally speaking, a good thing to limit that wherever we can. We certainly don't spend it without care, but compared to adding personnel, the expense of overtime is actually cost effective in most cases, as long as we're not exhausting our personnel. So for those limited times when you need to kind of peak up to deal with, for instance, snow removal in the winter, or certain emergency situations in police and fire, the existence of a relatively significant overtime expense is not necessarily a sign that something's broken. It actually can be a sign that something's being really well managed.
Okay, thank you.
What I'd like to do now, going through the articles in the municipal portion of the town meeting warning, most of the articles seem self-explanatory, at least to me. That might just be a skewed approach. But, this is year in and year out articles. But there are two other articles that pose different types of questions than we usually see. I'm referring to Article 24 and 25. The town clerk asked us to include articles on the warning to amend the town charter. I'm going to ask the town clerk and Ed Cappy to speak to those in just 1 second. What I'm going to note in terms of process is that there's a number of potential ways to amend or try to amend the town charter, and proceeding in the way that the town clerk has proposed in Article 24 and 25 provides for discussion at town meeting 2 years in a row, I believe, both this year and again, before a change to the charter would be then forwarded onto the legislature. And so the process that we're following here is going to involve discussion. I had that right? Yeah. So it could be at a special town meeting, but it requires 2 town meetings worth of discussion. And so we have Article 24 and 25, which I'll ask Ms. Cappy to explain their purpose, but we will need, after considering these provisions, if they're adopted or endorsed, we'll then have to have another town meeting or discussion at another town meeting in order to adopt them as formal recommendations of the town before they are passed on to the legislature for consideration. So if Annette could speak to us about Article 24 and 25, please.
Thank you. If you notice, 24 is basically a housekeeping issue. The charter has always held that for petitions and for certificates of nomination for town meeting members, that there were 2 separate deadlines. If you were a citizen and wanted to run for town meeting member and took out a petition and obtained your 10 signatures, your petition would need to be returned by the 7th Monday prior to the election. However, if you were an incumbent town meeting member, you do not need to do a whole new petition. You simply submit a form requesting that your name be placed on the ballot. And that held true for all incumbent town meeting members. And this would not change that process. The only thing that this Article 24 would change would be the deadline for the incumbents to return their notices. Currently, returning them on the 7th Monday prior to the meeting, where the others were the 6th Monday. It falls on Martin Luther King Day, and now the town is observing that as a holiday, and town offices will be closed. So the proposal for 24 is to just make the 2 deadlines the same. That all petitions and all certificates of nomination would be returned on the same time on the 6th Monday prior to the election. So that's all that one is. It's a housekeeping issue. The other one is a little more involved. Article 25 is a proposal for the town of Brattleboro to change the way we deal with early voters. If you wish to vote in any election prior to the actual election day, it's made relatively easy through federal laws, state laws. For a federal election, we have ballots available 45 days in advance, and for local and state, our ballots are available 20 days. So really you have 46 days to vote and 21 days to vote. And more people, as time goes on, take advantage of it. For any given election, we probably have about 25 to 35% of our voters voting early. And that's a pretty high percentage. And the ways that you can vote are to, if you are housebound, you can have 2 JPs deliver ballots. You can come into the office and request a ballot and take your ballot with you. You can ask us to mail it to you, or you can vote it right there in the office. And this would change the procedure by which voters vote in the office. The other methods would not change. The law requires that if we mail you a ballot or if you take your ballot, that you also are given return envelopes. So that when you vote, you place your voted ballot inside an envelope that has a certificate on the front. And you have to fill out the certificate stating you are who you say you are eligible to be voting in this election, and that you actually voted that ballot. Also, if you vote in our office, it's the same process. This would eliminate the need for the secret envelopes. Those envelopes are all collected, and then on election day, they're opened at the polls, and the ballots are fed through the machine just like all others. This would allow an early voter in our office to vote their ballot and put it right in the voting tabulator. A tabulator would be set up in the office. You would be able to it would be the same as on election day. The thing that probably might concern people would be that we have access to the results of those ballots. We wouldn't. A machine, once you start using a tabulator for voting, you can't disengage it. There is no way that we would be able to tabulate the votes and still use the machine. Once you tabulate the votes, the machine is locked. There's no way to use it again. So the machines would have a seal on them, a numbered seal. The seal would be verified every day to show that the machine has not been tampered with. The ballot bin where the ballots would fall into would also have a seal, a numbered seal on it. And that would be obvious if that seal were broken. That would be verified every morning. So we would know how many people voted early, the same as we do now, but we would have no way of obtaining the results. Those would be determined on election day, the same as everyone else's. And the ballot machine would be rolled up to the polling place, which is on the second floor of the municipal center now on election day, and it would be continued use the whole day. So your early ballots would be commingled with the ballots of the same day. So it's a pretty secure system. When the machine isn't in use, it would be locked in the vault. When it is in use, it would be in a sectioned off area in the clerk's office. So it would not be accessible to anybody just coming in and doing research or doing other business. It would be for election only, and it would be in a secure area. But we think this would increase voter participation. We think it would make it easier for people who want to vote and want to vote in the office. I will tell you that currently, right now, it is not used in any other state, in any other town in Vermont. We would be the first in Vermont to go with this method. It has been discussed with the Secretary of State's office, and we have their approval. They really like the idea. Neither the Secretary of State's office, the Director of Elections, or myself can figure out why no one has done it before. But their hope is that this would be a good pilot project and that Brattleboro would be a good area to begin this. And if it works, they would like to see maybe the legislature change and it might go statewide. So I don't know if anyone has any questions on either of the two.
Thank you, Annette. Yes.
Bill Penniman, District 3. In reading the article, there's a piece in here that says, prior to opening the polls on election day, it's the second to last paragraph, the number of early voters who voted in person shall match the number of voter ballots displayed on the tabulator. If it doesn't match, are they all invalid?
It'll match.
It looks like we're getting to the end. Mr. Regabi?
I don't know that there's necessarily any problems with these, but one thing that occurs to me is that since this early voting has begun and time has gone on, as Annette mentions, more and more people are using it. Now, it's 20 days locally, and that is about half of the time that we allocate for campaigns. So I was just wondering, Annette, can we start our campaigns a little bit earlier, like a week earlier or two, so that candidates have a chance to reach voters before they vote?
I don't think that's an issue for our department at all. I think that's strictly up to the candidate. That has nothing to do with how we vote.
So a candidate could start campaigning before they even had their petition in, if they felt that they would have a petition.
So we haven't called any of the other articles that are included on the agenda at the warning, but all the others appear to be recurring articles that come from year to year. Seeing no other inquiries at this time, I want to thank everybody who's come out for the informational meeting. I particularly want to thank everybody who's a new member. Thank you very much for participating and joining the town meeting. We'll see you at the school district meeting and then at town meeting, 8:30 on Saturday. Thank you.